Electricity. Like the air we breathe, it's invisible, but it is essential to life. We count on it to be there. It's the backbone of our lives and will be the backbone of our entire energy system. In the next 30 years, we'll consume more than double what we use today. By 2050, we will be sharing our planet with 2.5 billion more people. We all want the same thing, to live and prosper together, balancing our social, environmental, and economic needs. We want planet Earth, our home, to be better than today, for our children and for our children's children. Climate change has emerged as the challenge of our time, and these are extraordinary times, which call for urgent, collective action. The energy transition is vital for a sustainable future, a carbon-neutral future, and electricity generated from renewable power sources is our gateway. Making this possible would require the accelerated shift from fossil-based to renewable power generation, the growing electrification of transportation, industry, and building sectors, and the introduction of sustainable energy carriers, which are complementary to direct electrification, and all enabled by digitalization from a single device to the entire system. Together, with customers and partners, we are shaping the world's electricity backbone. From the most remote island communities to intense megacities, we are getting electricity to where it is needed. We are helping to close the gap for the 1 billion people without reliable access to electricity. We are proud to be powering a sustainable society towards a carbon-neutral future, making everyday life a little better for today's generation and those to come.
So much Hitachi ABB Power Grids for sponsoring this session and for the great video, for being a gold sponsor. We particularly appreciate that. Welcome everyone. This is the third Canadian Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technology Conference, proudly hosted by the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. My name is Parvati Pillai and I work as a program manager for ZIP Consulting Services and Business Development here at QTRIC. We have an interesting panel and a great group of panelists lined up for the discussion today. But before we get into the panel details, I do have an announcement. As a part of our commitment to gender parity in transit, we are running a national survey to assess gender disparity. In the Canadian transit industry, research clearly shows there is a stark difference between the number of women in senior leadership positions compared to men. We know these disparities exist, but we are less clear on why these disparities continue to persist. At QTRIC, one of the ways in which we have committed to gender and racial equity has translated into a research partnership with the University of Windsor. This has allowed us to engage in learning more about the complexities of workplace environments. To increase the number of women in senior leadership positions, we need to understand the experiences of all individuals with different identities who are currently working in transit so that we can make informed decisions or recommendations to transit organizations about best practices, policy, and strategy. Today, we invite you to complete a short online survey to learn more about the social and organizational context that you work in. The survey is open to anyone in any role who works in the transit industry in Canada. It is anonymous. We do not ask for your name or for your organization. We will be sharing back the findings of our research in the fall of 2021. If you have any questions about the survey or research, please contact the research team at the University of Windsor, who are listed in the survey link. This link has been pasted in the chat for you to complete at your convenience. Thank you very much. The link is there. Okay, so with that, I do want to give a brief context to what we are about to be talking about here today. We are here to discuss about the power providers of the future, Canadian utility strategies for transit and heavy-duty electrification. Before I invite my knowledgeable panelists to the stage here, I do want to give you a brief context. We are in a world of electrification wherein utilities who are the power providers to transit agencies are going to be equal partners or very collaborative partners in the process of electrification. We are here to find out how utilities are doing it, how the power providers are improving on that partnership and collaborating with transit agencies as we move forward with more rollout plans and further enhancements in the electrification domain. It's my absolute pleasure to invite the experts to the stage. I do have the privilege of having Ms. Kim Gerglis, Senior Lead Transportation Infrastructure from BC Hydro. Welcome, Kim. I do have the privilege of having Mr. Keegan, Tully, Director of Business Development at Ontario Power Generation. And I do also have the pleasure of having Ms. Janet Ebby, Utilities Consultant. So welcome to our great panel here. Thank you so much for finding the time to join me here today to discuss about this important panel topic for the day. Before we get into the Q&A session, which is something that our audience would be looking forward to, I do want to ensure like you get to have a presentation. So I do want to invite our first presenter, Kim, to share your screen and take us through your presentation. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. Such a pleasure to be able to speak to yourself and everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kim Gerglis. I'm the sector lead for transportation and infrastructure from BC Hydro. I support some of our largest customers in transportation. So I work regularly with our transit agencies, airports, ports, rails, things like that, and work with these customers as they transition through their own electrification plans, and we're here to support them. If we could move to the next slide. A little bit about BC Hydro. We are a Crown corporation owned by the province of British Columbia. We have 96.3% clean electricity that's generated within British Columbia, and we serve approximately 95% of the population. So we're very fortunate in British Columbia. We're not the only utility, but we're very fortunate already to have clean electricity generated. So this is obviously a timely topic that BC Hydro is certainly being considered a fuel provider for the future with regards to transit electrification and heavy duty fleet electrification. If we can move to the next slide. So in a very strange last 15, 16 months or so, BC Hydro has been really busy, trying to move to the next step as it pertains to plans for the electrification strategy overall to support our customers. And so what we embarked on really was to study fleets and to look at other utilities to see what they were doing with regards to electrification and supporting customers. And so we wanted to really get a better understanding of what role BC Hydro could play with regards to fleet electrification. So we assessed other peers utilities business drivers and the role in fleet electrification, what customer barriers there were to implementation in any emerging themes that came out of that. We wanted to capture and map some relevant approaches to BC Hydro's context, our customers and business drivers. So you can see that there on the screen. And we also wanted to inform next steps to accelerate fleet electrification across British Columbia, but further develop an approach to assess a return on investment for BC Hydro, which informs BC Hydro's business case to develop a more formalized program to address the electrification of transportation. So we are a regulated utility, unlike some other utilities that exist across Canada. So we do have, as everybody does, ratepayers to account for, and we do have obviously regulations and formalities and policies that we have to work through. And really, when it comes to electrification of transportation, for us, this had not really been done before in terms of laying out a roadmap. So this is really where we started, obviously, by asking our customers what they're struggling with, what the opportunities are, but also looking to our peer utilities across North America and saying, how are you guys addressing this? What can we possibly borrow or replicate here in our jurisdiction, and what can we modify to make it suitable for our needs? Next slide, please. Thank you. So the results of our studies really were used to inform our transportation electrification plan and our low carbon business case going forward. So our low carbon electrification business case is really what allows us to be able to put programs, potential funding in place. So it's a fairly important piece for us, to say the very least. We do have a few options for customers available for support. We have something new called the BC Clean Electrification Fund, and it's really for infrastructure as it pertains to fleet electrification, for infrastructure for clean electrification. So transitioning from fossil fuels to clean electricity. And we are able to provide essentially 50% of funding available for infrastructure costs on the utility side. So for those customers that have been embarking on electrification, you will understand that, while there's, for example, buses or heavy duty vehicles that are required, plus charging stations, there's also a lot of infrastructure required, not just on the customer side, so behind the meter, but also in front of the meter on the utility side. Well, at least there can be. So this Clean BC Electrification Fund is really to help remove the barrier of some of the infrastructure costs on the utility side. It is a new fund. It's in partnership with the province and the federal government. So if you need information, you can contact us, or you can go onto bchydro.com. There's a few caveats to apply towards this funding, but we look at it as another fantastic tool that we're able to open to our customers to help remove some of the barriers to moving forward with electrification. Further, with regards to our business case, we do have study and incentive funding available, thanks, for exploring and implementing low carbon electrification projects. So that's very often where I'm sitting with a lot of customers where they've come to me and said, Kim, this is something we're looking at, or potential pilot stuff. What can you help us do? And that's where that potential funding pot can become available. As well, this is a little bit old news per se, but still really exciting news. On April 1st, 2020, we had the demand transition rate that was implemented. And on April 1st of 2021, we had the overnight rate implemented, and both rates really minimized the impacts of electrification. So that was a big hurdle to overcome, customer asks. So it's fantastic that we have those options available for customers and that they are both usable now. And you'll see a hand there with the low carbon fuel credits. So currently our government is reviewing regulation and considering changes to the low carbon fuel standard, and government will continue to communicate with stakeholders before any changes come into effect. So that's sort of the situation with low carbon fuel credits continuing on. And most importantly, we continue to partner with our customers in their strategies to move towards low carbon electrification. So that's what's been going on from our front. If you could just quickly move to the next slide. Thanks. And just a review for those folks who may or may not know our fleet electrification rates. The overnight rate is really used for, in a scenario, for example, where you have depot charging, where we've reduced or eliminated the demand charge overnight to allow for mass charging. And then we have the demand transition rate. And this is really meant to be used for more of an en route scenario, where you're doing high charging for short periods of time. And the feedback really on both charging scenarios was that the demand piece was really cost inefficient, to say the very least. So with the demand transition rate, for the first 6 years of implementation of this rate, so we're already 1 year in, we don't have a demand charge, and then we'll eventually ramp the demand charge back in, with the concept being that more and more vehicles or heavy duty vehicles or buses will start to utilize chargers. And at some point, the demand, when it's folded back in, will no longer be a barrier once adoption has happened. So that's all I have today from BC Hydro. I wanted to thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you for painting the picture very clearly for BC. Our audience would have a lot of questions for you, but I do want to thank you and invite our next panelist to deliver his presentation. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Keegan Tully, Director of Business Development at Ontario Power Generation. The floor is yours, Keegan.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Q-Trick for having me today. A little bit about Ontario Power Generation. So we're the largest electricity generator in Ontario, and really a climate change leader. We have one of the most diverse generating asset portfolios in North America. So we have nuclear, a lot of hydroelectric, solar, and natural gas, and we've recently expanded into the United States with a portfolio of hydroelectric assets there. And more, we're getting involved in innovative electricity projects. We have our Gull Bay solar and battery storage project to get a remote First Nation community off of diesel or reduce their diesel use. We have our Nanticoke Solar. It's a 44 megawatt solar farm on one of the site of our former coal-fired generation plant. And then we have a number of customer-sited battery storage projects where we're installing stationary battery storage behind customers' meters. And we're really involved in transportation electrification. And I think one difference, we are a regulated. A lot of our power generation is regulated, but we're also have a heavy component of our business that's unregulated. And so the transportation electrification business is on the unregulated side, and we have a few key projects that we're pursuing here. We're working with Toronto Transit Commission to support their rollout of electric buses by doing the infrastructure for them. We have a joint venture with Hydro One that's called IV Charging Network, where we're rolling out personal vehicle charging across Ontario, and then we have a couple electric ferry projects in Eastern Ontario where we're supporting the charging infrastructure for those electric ferries. And we're really excited about the project with TTC. This is a project that we're doing via a subsidiary, and it's in partnership with TTC and Toronto Hydro, the local distribution company. And really, our scope in the project is to design, build, operate, and maintain all of the on-site electrical infrastructure, from grid connection down to the electric vehicle charging and anything in between, including backup power generation, stationary battery storage, solar PV. And really, it's a major undertaking. You're taking sort of small commercial electricity customers and turning them into major industrial electricity consumers with, in the range of 10 megawatts of power demand per site, and really installing battery storage and power generation for resiliency at those sites, so that if there's a grid outage, the fleet can continue to operate. And we expect that the project will be in the range of $500 million over the next 10 years in electrical infrastructure alone. And so what we do on our team is really develop custom solutions for transit agencies and other fleets to help them electrify. As you get into deep electrification at a transit site, it's quite complex. And what we do is we manage electrical infrastructure day in and day out. And so we can really help transit agencies do this and reduce risk and simplify the process for them. So we can start, and how you finance the infrastructure. We're willing to co-invest with agencies in infrastructure, and sometimes we can recover some of that investment from electricity markets, reducing the overall cost for agencies. We start early in the project. It's best to get involved early. We can help with feasibility studies, and then engineer, procure, construct all the infrastructure and project manage, and move right into operations, operating, maintaining the infrastructure, and making sure that it's reliable and safe and cost effective for transit agencies. And so what our typical structure for a project looks like is kind of like this. I described it in the middle. You have your regulated local distribution company delivering electricity to the site, and then you have OPG behind the meter doing all of the infrastructure. And it varies from agency to agency, and depending on the size of the deployment, what assets are going to be there. But we really operate in that middle ground. And then you have the transit agency. We think it's important for transit agencies to focus on the core of integrating these electric buses into their operations and their maintenance system, which is, you know, complex in its own right, and we can focus on delivering the complex electrical infrastructure. And so what we really think is beneficial about the program is this ability to leverage some of the assets that are there for resiliency, like the battery storage and the power generation, to earn money in the electricity market. And that allows us to co-invest in the project and really offset the cost for transit agencies. We also think, you know, we'd like to work off the TTC program. We're going to be setting up a lot of procurement programs and buying a lot of electrical infrastructure. And, you know, we already have relationships with a lot of these vendors, and, you know, we can give vendors predictability about orders and help them plan their manufacturing, and that can lead to value for all parties, and really benefit transit agencies and suppliers. And then finally, you know, I alluded to this before, we are what we do every day is manage electrical infrastructure. And so, you know, this is a different location than a power generation site, but it's similar infrastructure, and it's our bread and butter to, you know, construct these types of projects and operate them safely and reliably. And so we really bring our project management expertise around electrical infrastructure to the table, and can help with transit agencies deploy their electrification projects. And that's all I had.
Thank you so much, Keegan. A great presentation about what OPG is doing in this space, and you know, how you are enabling to have continued success. Right? Thank you so much. I do want to turn to our next panelist for her presentation now. Would like to invite Ms. Janet Eby, our utilities consultant, for her presentation. Janet, your camera may be turned off for bandwidth reasons, but we can hear you well. Go ahead.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Prabhati. And thank you, Qtrick, for inviting me to speak this afternoon. My presentation is going to be about a summary of a report that I recently finished for Qtrick on Canadian electrical utility electrification. So I began my report with whatever information was available on utility websites, looking for information they posted on their role in electrifying transit. And it into the utilities' other documents, such as sustainability reports, environmental statements, mission and vision statements, and in some cases, their annual information forms for some. And in essence, I was trying to see what the company's strategy might be, if not overt in terms of being called a strategy and on their website, what actually might be shown by the strategy posted. So I then looked outside the utility as well, especially if I didn't find very much, to the media, to transit agencies, et cetera, to find out if they referenced the role of their local utility. And then I looked at some municipal or city sites, in particular where the municipality or city might have a climate change plan or had ownership of the transit agency, let's say. All in all, for about 80 utilities in Canada. And I tried to stick to the information that was produced sometime in the last 2 years or so. The next slide, please. So the findings that came out of this report, there were very few explicit publicly strategies for utilities. And that didn't mean necessarily that the strategies don't exist. It could mean that some utilities didn't want to post them for some reason or other public. With respect to electric buses within the utility websites, with a couple of exceptions. And when reviewing publicly available information, many of the smaller about electrified transportation. Some had general information and links regarding charging and electric vehicles. Several, mostly larger utilities, were working with government.
Hi, Janet. I think there is
And in some cases,
Janet,
I
can you hear
found,
me? Sorry. I think there is an internet trouble
yes, I can.
because it is cutting out quite a bit.
Oh, no.
Maybe we should summarize and move to our Q&A session. Do you want to? Maybe we should. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So you'd like a summary of what I...
Right. I think the audio is cutting out quite a bit. Maybe we can talk more about it at the discussion. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So we would be bringing our panelists back to the discussion platform here. As maybe Janet, if you wouldn't mind exiting and re-entering, that may help your participation as well in terms of your bandwidth, maybe. Okay, so thank you so much for the great presentations, everyone. It's greatly appreciated on my end. So we have quite a number of questions from the audience, but before we get into it, I do want to turn to you, Kim, for the first query that I have, because you explained how you were approaching customers who were coming to you and enabling them to move in the fleet electrification domain. The question that I have for you is, have you, as the power provider, been in a position where you thought, well, had I had that power, I would have done this for the customer, but I cannot do it because of this regulatory limits or this limitation I'm facing?
Well, yeah, and this answer is going to be different across the board for different utilities. In a regulated space, we have tariffs that we have to abide by. So I'm just thinking about Janet's presentation and this sort of lack of public availability to utility strategies. And I do think it's a little bit of as I like to call it, reverse field of dreams. I wish it was a scenario where if we build it, they will all come. But we don't always have the luxury of being able to build out ahead of knowing what's coming. And it's twofold. Part of it is the regulatory landscape. And as we mentioned, we've got ratepayers that we have to be responsible for and adhere to. So that's one element. But the other element too is that a lot of times it's hard to know what to build out if customers are still formulating where they're going with their plans. So in the case of like a customer coming towards us, a lot of times they have a plan etched out, but maybe they haven't fully decided on the fleet. They haven't decided on the chargers, and they haven't fully decided on the charging scenario. And all those components impact what our infrastructure is going to look like. So it's really important that utilities partner with agencies, transit agencies, and other customers to really fully understand what their requirements are so that we're building the right infrastructure out. I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. That indeed does. Thank you, Kim. Janet, if your audio is working fine, maybe you could help me understand this perspective. In your experience as the utility consultant, what were some of the the challenges that you saw in the current standard, particularly in Canada, with respect to utilities supporting electrification? Janet, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can. Sorry, there are some technical issues happening. Maybe it's your internet too. Would you mind answering the question?
I think the challenge is generally centered, I would say, around the role of the regulator and the things that the utilities had to do in order to pursue transit electrification. If government policy is difficult for the utilities, I would say that was probably the major factor.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the policy level restrictions. Sorry, there was a little bit of an audio trouble as well for our audience. What Janet was suggesting is the policy level regulatory issues as well. So Keegan, if I may turn to you, because you did highlight how you are a service provider and how the infrastructure investments are made because of the fact that there is like a business case for you as well. But I do want to take a different spin on it, because from a utility standpoint, you're of course selling your power, right, to a customer, and the electrification brings you like a new array of customers that you didn't have before. These people were utilizing diesel, and now they are coming to electricity, and they are approaching the power providers for the same. When they do that, I'm speaking from the transit agency's perspective. They engage in a lot of they transcend a lot of challenges, shall we say, to actually reach that point, whether it be in capital expenditure or whether it be in planning a transition, etc. They are doing that for the sake of the community as well. It's not just like an internal like a cost cutting measure, that it's a wider community wide ripple effect is expected out of it, which there is. So how are you, as like a power provider, catering to that community interest, not just from the financial side but from the community side? How are you supporting transit agencies?
We've got a climate change commitment. We want to be net zero by 2040, and we want to help the economies where we operate be net zero by 2050. And so this really feeds right into that. We want to use our clean power to clean up other sectors. And so I think, that is a key motivating factor for us, other than, just the financial aspect. And I don't know if it's coming from sort of like a rate making perspective, but I think regulators tend to look at different customers differently. I don't know that if you ask a regulator, they would say that they're serving transit companies or transit customers as their sort of party. They look at electricity customers. And so if you're moving towards sort of rate basing infrastructure for transit agencies because they serve the public, I think most regulators would say, they just look at them as another electricity customer, and that's shifting costs to other electricity customers. And you need that kind of government intervention to overcome that. And I see Kim nodding her head in agreement, but like the OEB and the Ontario Energy Board in Ontario has been very clear that electric vehicle charging is not a regulated activity. The board staff, it's not distribution of electricity, and it's really a behind the meter sort of activity.
Great. So just an additional question on that, because you are in Ontario, I do want to ask you, how does your service delivery differ with the size of the transit agency? Because there could be a transit agency who wants to procure and deploy 200 electric buses. There could be someone who wants to only have like 20 buses because they are a smaller agency. How does your service delivery differ?
Yeah, I think it's it depends on their needs, right? A smaller agency won't require as much power, and it's probably an easier ask, and the location matters too on the system, right? TTC is all in Toronto, which is a fairly congested electricity system, so it's more complex, and they have large garages where a more suburban agency might have an easier time connecting. And I think it depends on what agencies' needs are around resiliency and backup, because you still might need those solutions if you're a smaller depot. And so it sort of varies, but I think we can meet different needs and scale up with the complexity sort of as necessary, depending on the needs of the transit agency.
So you basically can customize the solution per the demand of the client, right? That's basically what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Kim, I do want to turn to you on a different question here about the possible business models that are available out there, or that you can think of for utilities. So for utilities to deliver energy and power to have a fully electrified transit, and to make money while doing so. So maintain fair pricing, deliver the power, get the fleet electrification done. What is the business model out there? Like, can you conceptualize one for us?
Again, speaking from a regulated utility standpoint, it's pretty difficult to say just by virtue of the fact that we do have an obligation to serve, and we want to serve. I mean, we want to partner with agencies. So for us, I think the question is going to be more probably around. There's no question we'll be delivering if you are in a service area where we are located. You will be working with us. That's basically the bottom line. As far as different business models are concerned, I think that would really be more around a few things. It could be around charging infrastructure and who's going to manage and who's going to maintain that. So in the personal electric vehicle space, BC Hydro does have our own DC fast charging network that we've been asked to deploy. So we do have experience running and managing charging stations. However, that's not really a fully rolled out scenario for any other types of customers other than what government has requested us to do. So if there comes a policy that comes out from government that sort of asks different agencies to look at that, that could be a business model where BC Hydro potentially could participate. But again, that would require, a policy change or a request from government. And the feedback around that really is from our customers, sort of saying transit agencies, for example, saying, we're deploying all this stuff and we have to build substations to support it. And we've got all these charging stations, and our core competency is about delivering people to places. It's not about managing charging infrastructure. So we would really like a partner that would do that for us. So there's absolutely opportunities for utilities and other parties to take ownership of that. From a BC Hydro perspective, as I said, as a regulated utility, our hands are a little bit more tied in terms of what business models look like. But as mentioned, I think we listen to all proposals that might be on the table. And if that was something that was really, really important to government, and they really, really wanted BC Hydro to have a look at it, that's something we'd have to obviously talk to a regulator and look at policy and see where we land there. But I think absolutely for other utilities in a non-regulated space, that's a fantastic business model to consider.
For sure. Janet, I do want to turn to you for this question about business models as well, based on your experience of, working with different utilities or working in this space. And for our audience's information, there is an excellent report that Janet has prepared, which would be coming out from QTRIC as a white paper. So do not worry if you didn't get to hear what Janet had to say in her presentation due to bandwidth troubles. We would be sharing a report with all our participants here as well. So Janet, if I may turn to you quickly, about this aspect of business models, and Kim's point about regulated utility versus non-regulated utilities. How does it all play in?
Can you hear me, Parvati?
Yes, I can. Do you want me to repeat the question?
Oh, good. Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we were discussing about the different business models out there for utilities to ensure a fair pricing while delivering the services to aid electrification. And Kim's point was about being a regulator utilities, their hands are a little bit tied. There may be like applicable business models out there for non-regulated utilities. I was just trying to understand what your perspective on this is.
If for regulated utilities, there isn't a lot of wiggle room. I think probably Kim has said that. You have to have the support of government policy and your regulator to do very much. A lot of utilities have turned to their unregulated subsidiaries in order to enter into the space of transportation electrification, such as the one that Keegan has mentioned. So there's that model of regulated versus unregulated. There are some others as well that I've seen, such as the bus to grid projects, for example, taking place in the for example, has set up a program to give funding for electric school buses in exchange for access to their batteries to use as energy storage. So there's another business model where utilities can deliver energy and power to fuel electrified transit and to make money while doing so. However, again, you have to have government policy and regulatory support to be able to do that. And I would say that that's common through the models that I've reviewed.
That's great to hear, Janet. Maybe you do want to mute yourself. Yeah, thank you. Keegan, I do want to turn to you because of this discussion around the regulated utility space. We, from our experience at QTRIC, we often find utilities are very reluctant to speak about what they are or what they are not doing about electrified transportation. Is the regulated part the problematic part of the puzzle?
I think it's more of a competitive thing, to tell you the truth. There is, if utilities are doing it on their unregulated side, it's a competitive space, and so maybe they don't want to share too many details about it. And I think also on the regulated side, you have to manage the regulator and what's out there in the public domain, and so that could be part of it too. The one thing I would say about this question about the business model for regulated utilities, like it's part of the basic business model, right? Utilities build infrastructure and they earn a rate of return off their rate base, that the value of that infrastructure. And so when a transit agency is upgrading their service, you're going to get these upstream effects where they have to build new transmission stations, whatever, new distribution stations, things like that, and new generation potentially. And that's how, someone like BC Hydro earns their money. And so there is an interest, right? Like for me, all utilities, whether it's a local distribution company in Ontario or a vertically integrated utility elsewhere, have the business model in place to make money off transportation electrification. And it's not the behind the meter portion, it's the in front of the meter.
Because you mentioned about the point about competition, I do want to push back, not necessarily like in a bad way, but I do want to ask you, why are utilities, worried about the competition when our other allied partners are coming to the table together and making great things happen? Like, competing manufacturers are coming together in projects. Our own Pan-Canadian electric bus demonstration project is a prime example of that. And, why are you so worried about it? Because you are providing power, you are going to be earning money for it. We are creating a clientele for you that didn't exist before. But isn't that a community contribution perspective lacking, that you are just focused on the competition and not necessarily contributing to a change that the community is bringing for all of us?
And I don't know, I'm here talking about it, so it's not my fear as much, and I'm just speculating for others maybe. I think there's great collaboration in the industry, and it's important. I think the more we can move forward, it's good for everybody. It's good for our core business if somebody else is electrifying transit in Ontario. So I don't know why people are hesitant to talk, but we're out here sharing what our solution is, and we're eager to work with people on it and tell them about it.
That's great. That's great. So I do want to turn to you, Kim, of course, because you are a Crown Corp and you do have your own regulations that you mentioned about. Is the competition a real thing? Like, is that the problem that is preventing a collaboration?
I don't think so. I can see Keegan's point about there could be areas of competition, and keep in mind, areas of competition can even be things like for example, migration of RNG, CNG, hydrogen, electricity. So there's other fuel sources that are clean. Again, I don't think BC Hydro looks at any of that per se as competition. I think what drives us is really what our customers need and want. So if going with CNG or RNG or hydrogen fuel cell is the right way to go, we support that. We can certainly have a play in hydrogen. So I think really it's more about the fact that it's To some degree, planning a grid, we have to look at load growth. There's a lot of factors. It's like looking into a crystal ball, which is really difficult, although it's part of our job. We have to do that. When it comes to transportation electrification, it's a little bit of chicken and egg, as they say. And as I mentioned before, a lot of, because this is sort of greenfield to a degree, it's evolved as I've been involved with QTRIC over the years. I can see the evolution of plans and technologies and all that kind of stuff, but there's still a lot of heavy duty fleet electrification that is still not fully commercialized, is still not fully founded. And until we have some concrete information, it's quite difficult for a utility to understand how to plan. Because we have to plan based really on customer asks when they're at this large scale. So Keegan was referring to building infrastructure. That infrastructure is important, and it's expensive. And there's some costs associated from the customer side and from the utility side. So we're going to be reluctant to build out a huge system if they're suddenly going to pivot to something else. So I think part of the fear of utilities pulling out sort of electrification strategies or public electrification strategies just has to do with maturity. I think as you look over the next year or 18 months, you can even look at hydro. Like I said, it's taken us a while to start developing a more formalized strategy for electrification. I think you're going to see over the next, 18 months, 24 months, a lot more concrete plans as we have a better understanding of things that become standardized and regulated practices. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think that's more of the case than it is competition. But I think you're absolutely right. There's room for utilities to collaborate with partners across the board and other utilities as well to learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So Keegan, if I may turn to you for the Pride project that you undertook for TTC, like you emphasized how project management at the core of it is vital for you to have delivered that service as OPG. If you were to look back at it now that you have done a certain share of work for TTC, was there some learning points for you that you hadn't thought of, even though you planned out the project very well from the design, build, and operate perspective? What were your challenges that you hadn't planned for?
I think like a major challenge is how fast everything is evolving. The industry is just changing so fast, like whether it's bus range, the way the charging, what type of charging you're using, is it plug-in or pantographs, the standards, right down to the like actual charging technology itself. And I think that fluidity just makes it hard to stick a pin in it and move in a certain direction, I think. But you have to make a choice and move. And so I think that's critical. And like TTC has gained lots of experience from their pilots and understanding of the pitfalls. I think the complexity of operating within a bus garages are 24/7 operations, and how do you go and do a big project in there? That's a major challenge. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the key lessons.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So in terms of the technology evolution, I think that's a point that we all come back to. And in, today's morning keynote from Jennifer McNeil at Newfly, she was also suggesting this point about how the technology evolves. You cannot future-proof it all. You are quite right about the fluidity of the situation. How can utilities be proactively engaged in it so that you can support the customers who would be approaching you saying I am going to require this many megawatts from the grid? What can you do to help, right?
Yeah, I think for a regulated utility, like distribution sort of connection utility, flexibility is pretty important, because you have to recognize the uncertainty that's facing the transit agency. And I know Kim was just talking about how valuable certainty was to them, but adjusting your processes and procedures to accommodate it as much as you can is very helpful, because I think traditionally, at least in Ontario, utilities are looking sort of 5 years at what demand's going to be. But we know that you're going to turn over a whole fleet over many years, 10, 15 years. And so it's best to be looking at that long-term horizon. And so I think for utilities to adjust the way they plan and to accommodate the needs of transit agencies is really beneficial.
Great. So you touched upon this point about regulatory utility. So I do want to turn to you, Kim, for one question about this vertical integration. So do you think, in your opinion, are vertically integrated utilities better positioned to move in the space dynamically than the the non-vertical ones or the horizontal ones? What's your opinion?
Well, I'm going to say I think so, yes, but I'm going to also state that's just my opinion. BC Hydro is a vertically integrated utility, but there was a period in time where we weren't actually. So I think I guess there's sort of pluses and minuses, but I know from personal experience working through an actual implementation. So for example, supporting the Pan-Canadian trial, there is a lot of integration between groups that's required, a lot of communication between groups. So, that being vertically integrated, I think was really helpful. That's been my experience. But again, like I said, it's just my opinion. There's just, and I also think too, just reflecting on an earlier point that you were saying about process and having utilities sort of change their purview and way. I think that's part of it as well when it comes to a vertically integrated utility. I think that when we look at the electrification of transportation, I've kind of had to be a little bit of the flag bearer in our organization to say we cannot approach this the same way we've traditionally approached every other customer. This is happening too quickly. It's too widespread. It's too pervasive. It's not just transit agencies. We're working with cities. We're working with our, other utilities. It's so all-encompassing. We are going to have to do a different approach if we're going to meet the time to market and the request that's asked for us, like Keegan said, it's all happening really quite quickly. And I also think that the need for pilots and to be agile, to be able to sort of test and learn from this, it's also really helpful when you have a vertically integrated utility to be able to pull on different levers within the organization and pivot as quickly as humanly possible in a regulated space.
So clearly you were a champion in that regard as well, making sure some changes are happening, right? So kudos to you. Of course, Jared,
doesn't mean it's actually happening. I'm just
but you
trying.
tried, right? You tried. That is the most important element because, whether or not it resulted in an immediate merit or not, the fact that you championed is the most important factor. Janet, I do want to turn to you because, your opinion on this vertical integration piece is vital because a little bit about the wider industry and landscape in Canada. What is your opinion?
Maybe I'll Janet. Oh, is Janet there?
Sorry, Parvati, could you repeat the question?
Yes, so we were just continuing from Kim's point about vertical integration in utility setup. So what's your opinion on that? Is that enabling dynamism?
Definitely enabling. The best example of this is Hydro-Quebec, and it's sort of the it's one of the models. BC is as well, but Hydro-Quebec, again, getting back to the importance of government setting the policy and the direction and so on. The government wants transportation electrification. It funds it. It wholly owns. Accepts and promotes transportation electrification. It generates the power. It transmits it, and it distributes it, and it is the face of the utility to the customer. There's no potential misunderstanding of what the role is of the utility. The utility is the utility. It does everything. So that to me is sort of the ultimate. But Hydro-Quebec also has a lot of other benefits going for it, such as its large research and development facility, which helps to create uses for electricity. So it basically creates a market for its own product. So that is sort of the ultimate in vertical integration. But I think it has, It has to do with the fact that the utility is the face to the customer and does everything. It's cohesive and recognizable.
Great point there. Thank you, Janet. I do want to turn to you, Keegan, because you were wanting to share a point about that, the vertical integration. Over to you,
Yeah, and so maybe I'll take a slightly different
please.
perspective. Like I think vertically integrated utilities benefit the most from transportation electrification because they benefit on the generation side, the transmission side, and the distribution side. But for me, nimbleness and regulators don't go together. Like it's very difficult for regulated utilities. The way that rates are set, you have to know in advance what you're going to do and then go to the regulator and get it approved, and you only get to go every few years, and that is not nimble. And so like what we're able to do on the unregulated side is a lot more nimble and flexible. But we certainly don't benefit for our core business. We operate in a competitive power market, and so we may or may not sell the power that a transit agency is using, and so we don't have those upstream benefits, but we can be a lot more nimble on our unregulated side with meeting sort of the behind the meter customer needs.
So the agility, right? That is an important concept. So do want to turn to you, Kim, for this question, because we are focusing on the transit agencies, and you have quite a like an extensive experience working in this domain. What are the key questions that you get from the transit agencies when they are planning electrification, or what are the questions that you wish they had asked as well? So two parts to the same question.
I think the question is always like, how much power do you have and when can I have it? And that's a very complicated question actually to answer. And I think anyone who works in a utility will appreciate that, it seems like a simple question, but it's really not. I'm going to ask you, how much do you need? Where do you want it? When do you want it? I'm going to ask you a little bit about your load profile. How are you going to use it? I think those are those are the questions we get asked most often. I think the feedback that I give to our customers and any other customers going forward, and the message that I think we all sort of spread, is get your utility engaged early and engage them often. When it's even an idea in your head, oh, wouldn't it be cool to electrify this? Go talk to your utility. We're here to be a partner. The more lead time we have, the more helpful we can be. It doesn't help if you have baked and have a baked plan and then go to the utility and say, this is what we want, please go do it, because you are going to run into roadblocks of, we won't be able to deliver your power in time because it costs, it takes time and money to do things like, lay feeder cable underground if we have to do that. And also the timeframes can be somewhat unrealistic, unfortunately. This goes to Keegan's point about sort of that nimbleness. Depending on how complex infrastructure is, we may or may not be able to move as quickly as we'd like. I can tell you right now, as a utility, we would like to, regulated utility, I think we would like to move faster than we can. And we all recognize that. We're all trying to figure out how we can address those issues. But I really think I'm open to any questions from customers, just as long as they look at the utility as a partner. I always encourage my customers and future customers to say, you know what, if you even have a thought or a question, ask the utility. If it needs to be pointed in a different direction, we'll give you that advice. But please don't forget the utility is your partner. We are the fuel providers of the future. So you need to include us in any conversations, even if it's 10 years out. We can really provide some perspective that could potentially shape your plans.
That's great. Actually, you hit the nail right on the head, because I wanted to mention this one particular point. When we do feasibility assessments in our portfolio of work, we engage the utilities from step one onwards, and we work with the transit agency and the utility together to ensure the utility is a partner. And it's not like the customer is left in the dark trying to ask the utility, how much power would I need? We are able to tell them, like we would tell them, this many megawatts, that is what you need, and then it makes the process easier. I think you are, alluding to the fact that a feasibility analysis is an important step in planning an electrification, which makes all our jobs easy.
100%. There isn't a customer that is looking at a large scale implementation that has not done a feasibility study, whether it's on their own prior to us being engaged or in partnership with us. It's a very, very necessary step.
Great. So Janet, just a question, because you mentioned about Hydro-Quebec. What is the status of Manitoba Hydro? Do you have any insights to share on that?
Sorry, Parvati, was that addressed to me?
Yes, I was asking you because you mentioned about the R&D work that Hydro-Quebec is doing, etc. In your previous comment, a follow-up question to that about Manitoba Hydro.
Manitoba Hydro, there's no explicit electrification of transportation strategy on their website. They do have a climate change strategy, which a lot of other utilities have as well. And it states that Manitoba Hydro is investigating new ways to electrify our fleet vehicles, etc. They provide information on their website about EVs and so on and so forth. They also mention that financing is available to customers for a level 2 electric vehicle chargers as part of a home energy efficiency loan. There is this is again a good example of where the utility may not have a lot of information on its site, but obviously must be involved to some extent. There is a major electric bus implementation project going on in the city of Winnipeg. So it may not mention Manitoba Hydro site, but I know that Manitoba Hydro, for example, is involved in the implementation of that electric bus project. So that's not unusual. And again, I apologize for not being able to go through the rest of the presentation earlier, but it's not unusual for me to find information about a utility's strategy outside of the utility's own information that's publicly available. So I may find things that indicate that it is involved in transit electrification, but you may not find that information on the utility's website.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Janet, for that comment. You want to mute yourself? Thank you. So with that, I'm aware of the fact that we are at time. Thank you so much to Kim, Keegan, and Janet for sharing your valuable insights. I think we have had like a great Q&A. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. It was an enriching episode of very informative discussion. I hope our audience have also enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I think essentially the point that you're trying to articulate here through your presentation and through your dialogue is you are here to help as a utility. You are here to support electrification, and you would do the customized solution that your customer needs, and that's what we want to hear as well. Thank you so much once again for joining us here at the 3rd Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technology Conference, proudly hosted by QTRIC. We have our closing address happening in 9 minutes, so see you all there. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.